Good evening to all of you. It's so good to be back together.
I know, right?
It's been a little bit of a time.
It has.
I know every time we do this, it's like brand new beginning.
I know. We get 1 week off and we get spoiled.
Right? It is great. So anyway, welcome to all of you who are joining us via Facebook Live or through streaming or perhaps through one of our archives. My name is Deb Kaiser-Cross, and I serve as the Minister for Congregational Care here at Naples United Church of Christ. And I am joined by my colleagues, Reverend Dr. Dawson Taylor, who's a senior pastor, and Reverend Dr. Sharon Harris. Oh, we do this every time.
I know, it's like, we don't use our titles each other, so it's like,
Reverend Dr. Sharon Harris, who serves as the assistant minister, and we really are thrilled to do this. This is one of our favorite things we do every week. So, welcome. And I think, Dawson, you might have a couple of announcements for us.
can I have this happy moment that this is, we're starting our final clergy roundtable with you.
I know.
It's like we're voting you off the island after this.
Well, I hope not.
Well, me either, but I was thinking about that today. I really was. Like, I kind of, I got sad.
I know. I am. There are a lot of things I will miss. Those little administrative details.
You've been naming those off lately.
But there are things I will really miss. Really miss you. Really miss the congregation. So. Anyway, it's good to be here.
No, and we look forward to it. I think this is such an amazing book. Because I was sharing before we went live that this may, we'll see by the end of the discussion, but like this may become my favorite book because it, as far as all the books we've done, because I've loved this book. No, I just want to invite people to, if you would like to participate in our An Evening with Your Pastor, we'll be back together again tomorrow evening, virtually. And that's a really great opportunity for people who wish to know more about the church, who are interested in membership. And so we want to invite you. There are still spaces available. And so the best way to be a part of that is to let Wendy know in the church office, and you can email her, wendy@naplesucc.org, or you can certainly call the church office in the morning, and she'll get that Zoom link to you, and you can join us tomorrow evening, Thursday, at 7 to 8:30. Pour a glass of wine, brew some coffee, some tea. If my dad were here, he'd say pour an old-fashioned. I don't even know what is in an old-fashioned, but I know he likes them. So, and then, of course, we always want to invite people for worship to join us virtually, and we always are looking forward to the Sunday ahead of us.
Yes. Okay. Well, this, as you said, is the first week of our newest Clergy Roundtable, and it's based on the book Love is the Way. It's by Bishop Michael Curry, and if that name seems a little bit familiar to you, you might remember that he was the one invited to deliver the sermon at the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And his powerful sermon emphasized the redemptive potential of love, using fire as a metaphor to its power. And then shortly after that, Bishop Curry served as the officiant for the state funeral of Senator John McCain, and he also was at the funeral President George H.W. Bush at the Washington National Cathedral as well. So the Most Reverend Michael Curry is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in the United States. He was elected in 2015, and he's the first African American to lead the denomination. He was previously the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina, where he was heralded as an advocate for human rights and an inspirational preacher, and that goes without saying. He's amazing. This book is both a personal testimony to the power of love to change his own life and a call to all of us to do love so that it can literally change our worlds.
And I just looked this up today, just in factoid. The Episcopal bishop is elected for a 9-year term.
Oh.
Wow.
So he's in that office, and I think they're limited at that. I don't think they can serve 18 years. I wasn't that bored. I didn't read that long, but I was curious just to see how long they can.
So it's about midway through.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I couldn't remember if it was 6 or 9, and so I looked it up. It was 9. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So we've divided the book into 6 sections for reading and our discussion together, and each week we're going to focus on 2 chapters. So this week we are going to be doing the introduction through chapter 2, which takes you up to page 49, if you're paying attention with your book. And if you don't have it, you can order it from your favorite bookseller. I suspect you might even be able to find it down at Barnes & Noble down the street. So
Yeah, and Audible, I'm doing Audible again, and he reads it, and he's great.
that's great to
Yeah.
know. And while it's always helpful to have read the material beforehand, it's not necessary to enjoy the conversation. So let's get started. So in the introduction, when his daughter asked Bishop Curry what he was working on, he responded, "Some of what I've learned about faith, family, community, and ancestors." Her response was, "So you're writing about life lessons?" Classic daughter response, I thought. And after pondering that for a bit, he quotes Frederick Buechner. He said, "Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery it is, in the boredom and pain of it, no less than in the excitement and the gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace." So I started thinking about, in light of this year of pandemic, it seems like good wisdom for all of us. So I'm just curious, what have you learned in listening to your life this past year?
Well, since we did know some questions ahead of time, I've thought about this. And what I found is some things I knew, but you have to learn them again, and you learn them at a deeper level. And one of the first things that just sort of stream of consciousness came to me, which was interesting because I hadn't thought about this until I was responding to your question, is the realization that I am the one responsible to take care of myself. And that whether it's my physical well-being, my mental well-being, my spiritual well-being, that's always true, but especially in a time of pandemic, that I'm the one who's responsible for what I eat and drink and do, and how much time I give to myself, to others, paying attention to my own feelings, and opening myself to the presence of God. And like I said, I haven't thought about that until just now, but it's like, it's just a reminder, nobody else can do that for you. And so it's kind of a renewed sense of responsibility for myself. I thought of other things, but your turn.
All right.
Yeah, I was really struck this year, and part of it's been lessons I've learned, but also part of it has been things that I've read that talk about being gentle with yourself. You know, I've really been struck by those reminders that say, you know, you're doing the best you can. And, you know, and kind of that mindset of it's the long game, you know, that you don't have to do it perfectly every day, every time. So, you know, as I often joke, as a firstborn Protestant, Enneagram 3, you know, people pleasing, all those things, you know, when I don't have a day that goes the way I want or that I expect or that I lay out, you know, that can be really paralyzing. Well, in a pandemic, it's amazing how many days don't go the way you want. And so, you know, those reminders about being gentle with ourselves, for me, has been really important. And like you say, Sharon, I was really struck by what you're saying about how we have to relearn those lessons.
You know, and mine is pretty simple. I realized how important connectedness is.
Yeah.
And this year in particular, our daughter moved back to the United States. And so we have the opportunity to be together as a family because we're all in Florida. And so we took advantage of that often. And also the connectedness of my extended family. My mom went through a long illness and death this year, and we all came together. And the preciousness of the life of my mother's life and the life of my siblings, and how it wove us together into a really deep tapestry that was not there before. But the other thing that I've learned is how much I value silence and solitude and reflection time, which I have always loved, but I don't know that I had as much opportunity for it. And so we've talked about that, about how for you that's not your favorite thing.
Right.
But for me, it was pretty good. I really liked
Yeah.
it.
I'm like, enough of the silence.
Enough,
Yeah.
right. It's also different because you live by yourself.
Right.
And
right.
I live with someone else. And so it does make a big difference. And
Right.
I think realizing that, we have different life lessons that we've learned.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to add to your theme of connectedness, one of the things that am most happy about is having used some of this time to reconnect to friends going back to elementary school
Yeah.
and seminary days, and that it's just made me realize how important relationships are, and that we have to give them time.
Yeah. Well, let's move on a little bit. And Bishop Curry began with some of his personal and communal history. He was born in Chicago, where his father pastored an Episcopal church. So he was, as we call it, a PK, preacher's kid. But shortly after, they moved to East Buffalo, where he was not just raised in the African American community there, but was raised by it, in his terms. He noted that, like many in his community, while he lived in the urban north, his roots were deep in the soil of the rural South, and deeper still in the ancient soil of sub-Saharan Africa. Just beautifully written. His community was a part of the migration from the south northward, where he wrote, "They were fleeing separate bathrooms and water fountains, separate and unequal schools. They fled being segregated, separated, cast down, and cast out. They fled the place where old men were called boy and old women were treated with disrespect." And according to Bishop Curry, I just can't believe he said this, they loved America in spite of the fact that America didn't love them. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It was in the church that he learned the power of love, remembering people saying over and over, possibly quoting Booker T. Washington, "Never let anyone drag you so low as to make you hate them." In short, I think this book is really about the lessons the bishop learned in his lifetime, and the most important one seems to be that the way of Jesus is the way of love, and that the way of love is the only way to freedom. So, what struck you as you read his short autobiography?
Well, because I've read past the first few
Right,
chapters,
right.
I know that there's a lot more autobiography to come. And he is just a powerful storyteller, as we've all commented, and there are stories in the book that will bring you to tears. One of the first things that struck me, I never knew that he grew up in Buffalo.
That's
And
right.
you know that we lived in Buffalo for 33 years, and I know some of the neighborhoods he talked about, and I know Hutch Tech and its reputation. I haven't been in it, but I've driven by it. So I had just an experience of familiarity with that, and that was fun. And
Yeah.
like I said, I just think he tells the story of his life in such a powerful way. I'm envious.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that struck me about not only his story, but the way he tells his story and embraces his story is the way that, and he acknowledges this in the introduction, that he could have become bitter or believing that life and or God had done him wrong. And I was just continuously struck by how much grace he has for his faith, for the world, for the people he serves, and how that just flows through the story and through his story. Because he really, some of those early, starting with the death of his mother, he could have been just so bitter, and he's not. And I was both struck and inspired by that.
I was I was brought to tears by the power of a church raising him. Like he named one woman, especially women, one after another, who mothered him and loved him and did the things a birth mother or an adoptive mother would do. And I just realized the church has so much power to do that in people's lives. And it was pretty inspiring for me.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So he made a few quick comments about the power of love that I want to lift up here and get your comments on. Yeah. He said, the way of love is how we stay decent during indecent times. What a powerful one-line challenge for us in these days. So what does it take to stay decent in undecent times?
Yeah.
You get to start this time.
The word that I wrote down was groundedness. I think you have, or rootedness, coming off of our Lenten theme. I think you have to know who you are, who you are and whose you are, and be reminded that you have purpose beyond that moment. And I think if you are rooted in that and you know that, it helps you stay rooted in the love that he talks about.
Yeah.
I guess I came at it differently. I don't disagree at all, but for me, it's that fundamental premise of treating every single person with respect because of our fundamental belief that they're made in the image of God. And whether I like their behavior or understand why they think about the world that they do, it's trying, and I don't think any of us succeed. Speaking for myself, I know I don't succeed, to look at every other person through God's eyes. And to remember that God loves every one of us and wants us to love each other. We don't earn God's love, and other people should not have to earn our love. But we don't live that. I mean, that's just one of the places where we fall short.
And I think I'm going to follow up on that. I think what it takes is to see dignity in every person. And I was trying to think about people who have modeled that for me. And there was this man who started a treatment center in somewhere between Indiantown and Okeechobee. His name was Mickey Evans. And he had in that treatment center, most of the people had come from jail with felonies who had lived really tough lives. And he could always look at each one of them as a child of God, look in their eyes, and see the dignity in the other person. And so whenever you were with him, you felt like you were a child of God because he saw you that way. He was just amazing. And I've always wanted to be like that after having experienced it in him. So, all right. So then Bishop Curry drops two quick quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. in the introduction. He said, "We must learn together as brothers or perish together as fools. And we have two choices before us, chaos or community." How might we, as followers of Jesus in the beloved community, model a different path as we move forward?
I think this might be one of the hardest questions you ask.
Yeah.
And because you said, as followers of Jesus in the beloved community, I found myself thinking, we talk all the time about polarization out in the world, but thinking about polarization and division within what we call the body of Christ and within the church. And that those divisions, in some ways, are harder for me to know what to do with because I know what I think needs to be done, but when there are people who either think I'm going to hell because of the things I believe and do, or who think other people are so wrong, who I think are on target, it's really hard to know, how do we come together as followers of Jesus in one church? We often talk about, the segregated hour, the most segregated hour of the week being Sunday morning in black churches and white churches. This is just so much bigger because it is just a division that cuts across race, ethnicity, class. I don't have an answer, in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Sharon that I think this to me is probably the most challenging question that you put before us. And this comes from an article that King wrote entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community?" And I found myself, when I was reviewing this, thinking to myself how we are in this time again. Like, because what King was challenging, if I remember correctly, which I believe I do, was challenging the civil rights community and on behalf of the civil rights community, challenging the country to say, are we going to let our nation be like this and live in this chaos, or are we going to build this beloved community? And I just think to myself, I actually started thinking that I think as a nation and as church, we're trying to figure out what model we do want to have moving forward, because I don't think we know yet. Because I cannot be here tonight without thinking about where the greater Minneapolis area is tonight. And, there's so many questions about police and brutality and race and all these questions. And none of those questions are easy questions, right? I mean, if it were all easy, if there were simple answers, we'd have done it by now, whether we like it or not. And so I think we're trying to figure out what does chaos, what does community look like, as was King when he penned that article.
And I agree with both of you. I can't imagine what it looks like on a meta level. But I had this really interesting experience in the last class I taught. And it was a small group. It was about 12 of us. And it was very obvious that within the class that we had people on both sides of the political aisle. And very heartfelt, very strong opinions. Yet, as we listened to each other's stories over the 6 weeks we were together, we understood each other's why they were where they were. And the very last week, one of the people who was kind of in the minority in terms of there were more people on one side than the other, said, this is the first time I felt like somebody really heard me, heard what I thought, and I'm just really grateful. And I thought to myself, would that there would be so many more conversations like that, because it always happens. I mean, it can't happen globally until it happens one person at a time either. I mean, it's a both and thing, and I was just very struck by that.
Yeah. As we talk about it, and as I often speak about from the pulpit, is that I believe that's the great calling of the church, but specifically of this church, is to be a place where people with, quote, opposing views, however you define that. I mean, that can be politically, theologically, socially, can come and be safe and have their voices heard in respect. It doesn't mean that there's this magic utopian view that everyone agrees, because I don't think that's realistic either. But that people, I don't think it's an unfair expectation that people can be heard.
And it goes back to the dignity thing.
Yeah.
Is that to see each of those people as having dignity and worth and something to offer. And I really did understand her perspective much differently by the time I heard the stories. Yeah. And it was a beautiful time.
Well, I think about, the term sacred worth, because that's been used against so many in the LGBTQ community, that, especially in the Methodist Church, that, to say that you see the dignity and sacred worth of each person, it doesn't mean that you agree, but it means with them or however you want to define choices or lifestyle or things. But it does mean that you recognize the divinity within each person. It harkens back to what you were saying about your friend who started the recovery center.
So Bishop Curry concludes this introduction with an outline of the upcoming chapters, which include learning to understand the meaning of love, alongside all the questions and challenges we might have to actually loving people who are different from us, who think differently, who act differently, who love different political or religious convictions. And he doesn't back off from the difficult ones. So I think we're going to have some great conversations. So let's start with chapter 1 and definitions. And we've done this a lot, so I'm going to kind of swiftly move through this. He talks about love, the meaning of love, and specifically in Scripture. So many of you have heard that there are basically 3 words that are used in Scripture over and over for the word love. In English, we have 1. So eros is sexual love, philia is fraternal or sibling love, and agape is a sacrificial love that seeks the good and well-being of others, of society, and of the world. So Curry tries to help us envision what agape looks like. And I thought this was a really interesting way of doing it. He said, think about somebody who impacted your life for the good. Somebody who stood by you, pushed you, believed in you, maybe even sacrificed for you. Odds are they weren't doing it because it served them. They were doing it because they cared about you, because they wanted life's sweetness to open wide to you. I just love that. Yeah. So love is a firm commitment to act for the well-being of somebody other than yourself. So were there any thoughts or insights that you had about love after that little definition?
I just love this image that he paints with his words in the last part that you raised in his quote, because they wanted life's sweetness to open wide to you. Because I just think about that can be, again, in the eros, the philia, the agape, that could be so many different things. But when I think about that, I think about those people who have just had such a profound impact on my life and where it has brought me. But I loved that image. He is such. He's talking about wordsmith, but yeah, he is just such a tremendous wordsmith.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of insights about this. Certainly, even before seminary, I'm sure I heard a sermon about these different kinds of love. And I've certainly heard many people talk about really wanting and working for the good for someone else and for others. And I found myself thinking about Jesus saying, sure, it's easy to do that for your family and friends.
Yes.
And it's true. Of course I want what is the best for my children and grandchildren and my parents and my aunts and uncles and cousins. And that the challenge becomes continuing to work for the sweetness to open wide to people I don't know, or people maybe I don't even like in terms of how they interact with me or with others. And that's just that challenge that keeps coming up because it is much easier to work hard for the good for the people that we love dearly than to do it.
I was just thinking something you just made me think about is sometimes I think it's easier to wish for the sweetness to open wide for people that I don't know. It's easier for people I don't know than people that I know but don't like. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, come on.
Yeah, generalizing.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Easy.
I mean, if we think about it in broad statements, I mean, it's like, well, I don't know them, but I don't wish ill on them. But I know them. Yeah, I know. I don't. I mean, come on.
Not today. Not today.
If the proverbial sweetness does not open wide to them, I'm okay with that, God. I mean,
All right. So
that's why I won't publish a prayer book like the two of you. Yeah.
So then he goes on to do a great description of the church in Corinth because he likens it to our culture today. And I think he's pretty apt in that description.
I think he likes St. Paul too, by the way. I mean, he
more
brings
than I do.
Yeah,
but that's okay.
He brings Paul. Yeah, you do not like Paul at all, I don't think.
Oh, that's
but
so true. I like some
you
of
like
his
him
stuff.
a little bit,
Yeah.
but no, he seems to bring up Paul a lot.
So, but anyway. So the church in Corinth had a lot of division going on. There's a lot of rancor all around them. And Bishop Curry reminds us that love isn't a sentiment. It's the only thing left to save a community divided. He wrote, if love looks outward to the good of the other, then its opposite isn't hate. Its opposite is selfishness. It's a life completely centered on the self. Selfishness is the most destructive force in all the cosmos, and hate is only its symptom. Wow.
Yeah.
What did you think of that? Either one.
I agree with everything he said. But I've decided that this is the theme for the night, or maybe for my life. It's so complicated.
That is your favorite word.
Because, like, after both and.
I was going to say, that's how, I was either waiting for a both and statement or, yeah.
It's complicated.
But I think, I was thinking about this in terms of our culture, and I think as a culture, we do not know the difference between selfishness and self-care,
Fascinating. Okay.
between self-esteem and self-aggrandizement or narcissism. And so I think for some people,
It's become clearer recently, but I understand what yeah.
I mean, I think his distinction is really important, but then you have to unpack what selfishness means, because I really don't think, Jesus says, love one another as yourself. I don't think we live that very well. And so clearly we don't think Jesus is talking about be selfish. Loving self means something different, but that's the complication, because I don't think we've figured it out well. And in one of the chapters that I'm doing somewhere down the line, the subtitle of the chapter is, oh, does this mean I have to be a doormat? You know, to which he
Right.
obviously says no. But
And we're going to unpack it a little bit more, because he does kind of help us understand what selfishness is as the chapter goes on.
Yeah, and I do think, I think one of the challenges of the golden rule is, where it talks about love others as you, or treat others as you wish to treat as you want to be treated, is that sometimes we don't treat ourselves very well. Sometimes people treat themselves too well, and again, I think that's that fine line of distinction. So I actually thought, you're going to love this answer, toilet paper and masks. Thinking about the last year, I mean, there are people who literally, the Stephen ministry here, and one Stephen minister in particular, helped a member of our congregation get toilet paper because they literally had none. And it was not because they couldn't afford it. It wasn't because of any infirmed issue. It was because they literally could not find it. So not only in the most developed world nation in the world's history, but also one of the wealthiest zip codes in that said world, there was someone who could not find toilet paper, and the reason is because we were all hoarding it. And to me, that's about selfishness. And I'm not trying to be political, but people who want to get in a debate with me about masks, I'm sorry, but that's a selfish debate. Because we have had medical people talk to us about if we had worn masks at an earlier time in a more aggressive way, we would have saved lives. And to me, so all of us are double vaccinated and have been now, fortunately, for a couple of weeks. But what I also know is there's also masks in each of these chairs, because we wore masks out here and we'll wear masks back to our offices because we take it that seriously.
Yeah, we do.
Because I think we see it as a communal act, not as a self act. So I'll get off my soapbox, sorry. But that's what immediately came to mind was toilet paper and masks.
But that's a very good example, because the people who insist on not wearing masks see it as their right. And you can't make me do something I don't want to do, which is the complete opposite of trying to think about what is good for the other person.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's the difference. Is I don't do it because I need a mask. I do it because there are people on our staff and there are people that I interact with who I could potentially unwittingly or unknowingly be carrying the virus, and I don't want to. I interact with way too many people, and I don't want to be a problem.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on, because I think he unpacks it just a little bit more.
Does, yeah.
He wrote that while faith and hope are necessary for a full life, they're not a guide for life. They don't tell you what to do. That's love's job. Love tells you how to direct the energy of outrageous faith. If hope and faith are its wind and sails, love is the rudder. It's God's GPS. And to switch on God's GPS, simply ask yourself a question. Is this just about me, or is it about we? Does this decision I'm ready to make serve only my unenlightened self-interest, or does it somehow serve the greater good? And if the answer is me, and only me, you don't do it. It's that simple. Me, or we? And that was challenging for me. What did you think of using that question as a help in decision making?
Yeah. If you remember the context of him sharing that, he was being interviewed for the Harvard Business Review. And because I was really struck by the fact, I thought it was interesting, and I was grateful that that publication was turning to clergy for lessons on leadership and decision making and things like that. And I do think, and Bishop Curry has been lauded for his leadership of the church in a very tumultuous time. So I do think he's someone whose voice ought to be in the community square, adding to our dialogue. And so I just thought that was such a great phrase that anyone who has to make decisions, and most of us have had to make very difficult decisions over the last year, but especially those who have to make decisions that impact groups of people, is this about me or we? And I just thought it was an extraordinary way to frame it.
I thought it was too.
I do too, and I think it's really a challenge. And I think one of the ways it becomes a challenge for me and perhaps for other people is there's a part of me, and I hear it from others, that doesn't believe anything I do is going to really make a difference. That we feel so helpless before the grand problems of the world that I have to believe that what I do is going to make a difference and make a difference for we. Otherwise, it's like, why am I bothering? Because it's not really going to help we anyway. It's just not powerful enough. It's not a big enough difference. And I think what you said, Deb, about those close relationships in a group where people do hear and accept and value each other despite differences, are an example where it seems like you can't do it, but it can be done. And what I have to believe in order to ask the we question is that even the ripples in the pond make a difference. And so I need to figure out, are those ripples going to spread out in a way that helps others, or just me?
And I think, in responding to you, I think that we don't realize the small impacts we can have. I was in a clergy group the other day, and the whole group of people are getting ready to retire. And one of the guys said, I had to come to terms with, did I really make a difference in ministry? And I know he did, because I know him. I mean, he's made a tremendous impact. But he said, I had to say to myself, it's enough that I did my part. I did what I could do. I planted seeds. I did those things. And I think using that me versus we is really helpful in making decisions about how do you spend my time, and being able to just hope that whatever it is we do, using that lens can make a difference.
I think so.
Yeah, and I just had just speaking about collegial relationships, I had a friend recently who left a congregation under difficult circumstances, both for the congregation and for this colleague. And the colleague was reflecting with a group of us about those types of questions. And they had been at that church into double digits, and said, I have to trust that what I did there not only built upon what had been done for good, but will continue to do that. And I just thought that was such a healthy way of looking at it, because they're still unpacking a lot of the pain, and that's really clear. But I thought, wow, and I responded later to a message to them saying, I'm just really proud of the healthy way that they're handling that. But I just thought, I think that is emblematic of what so many people, it's not just ministers who go through that, right? I mean,
Sure.
I think there just have to be so many times when people in their professional lives and their personal lives, I think parents go through that, right?
Oh, yeah.
That have to ask those, or not have to, but ask those questions. Has this made an impact, and has it made a difference?
But I also do think, in going back to the me versus we, it is a lens that I really want to take with me to really use that in some of my decision making. I'm not sure I've ever thought of it quite like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to avoid selfishness, obviously, but to do that as I make decisions was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, so we're going to move on because we, got to move on, chapter 2. And the title's Looking for God, How Do We Find God's Love? Which there were some sweet stories in it. So he begins with a quote from that beautiful hymn that we've heard Becky do many arrangements on, Ubi Caritas, which is where true love is found, God is there. So Curry writes, there's a simple way to connect to the divine anytime you feel like it. If God is love and love is an action, you've only got to get out there and do it. You've got to get out there and receive it. And the easiest way to do that is to become part of a community of people who want to give and receive love, to liberate themselves from the tyranny of self, to look outward. God may be the source of love, but people are often the vessels. Love that. It's the community of love we create for ourselves and others. When that happens, God is there. God is showing up. So often I think that we think connecting to the divine only happens in worship or in prayer or in solitary times in nature. But Curry reminds us of how often people are the vessels. So how have you seen God showing up through people?
I just think about this colleague that I used to work with, that if people came into his office and they would be pouring out their heart about a tough time they're going through or their sorrow or grief or whatever, he would sit and listen. He was a deeply compassionate person. He didn't always show it, but he was a deeply compassionate person. And about halfway through, he would open a drawer and he would throw saltine crackers on a package of saltine crackers and go, "Here, do you want crackers with your wine?" And I was like, now keep in mind, congregational care was not his portfolio.
Really good to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to go, "Oh my God, you can't do that." And he would say, "Well, no one's fired me yet." And I'm thinking, "Oh, not yet." And, but what he would go on to say from that was, he would invite people to not sit and moan and groan and wallow, but to go and do something for someone else. Because he would say, "What have you done for someone else?" And so I always think of that colleague and laugh, because if I'm having a difficult time, I think to myself, I need to go and find a way to do something for someone else. And so to me, that's so often how I experience God's love. And I think it's so often, we've joked about it, but I do think that it is so often how your personality is how you experience God's love. So I experience God's love through people, but I have introverted friends and colleagues who that is how they experience God's love, is through being by themselves in nature or in these very quiet moments. And I'm like, "Oh my God, turn on some music, do something." But, that's...
Well, and for me, that's the incarnation, that God is embodied among us. And where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am. But what I wanted to just back up in terms of worship, because what I was thinking about is, even in worship, for me, very often, the vessels of God's presence are people.
Yeah.
So it may be somebody who gives me a hug when I need it. It may be meeting somebody new who's really fascinating in the gathering place. It may be a prayer concern that's lifted up that really speaks to my heart. Because it's about someone. So it's not even, it's both and in worship.
Of course it's both and.
I thought if we get through this entire evening without a both and, I'm going to be,
But I certainly just think we encounter God in our families, in relationships, far and wide, in our mentors. I mean, yes, that human beings, I'm enough of an extrovert to feel the same way, that's how I experience God's love.
As clergy, do you struggle sometimes, though, in worship, leading worship, that's not always where you experience God? I mean, I do have worshipful moments in worship.
But not usually.
But not usually,
I gotta be
frankly.
honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
It's when I visit somebody else's church
Right,
where I get
exactly.
to just
I mean,
sit.
usually, yeah. I mean, quite honestly, it's on
Yeah.
vacation when I'm
Yeah.
at someone else's church that I actually worship. That's why I love going to clergy gathering events, because no one sings like clergy sing. I mean, with this robustness, but also because I don't have to lead it.
Yeah, amen to that.
I mean, it's always an honor to be asked to preach those, but I really enjoy when I'm not, because I can just be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, because I was trying to think on a very personal level how people have been vessels for me, especially this past year. And there have been moments where I have been pretty vulnerable in my grief over my mom and some other things going on. And it's people's tenderness towards me in my grief that they guard my heart. And I experience God's presence in them. It's as if Christ is with me. And I hope I can be that for other people. But I think it's in our vulnerability often that we experience people as vessels. At least that's been my experience in my life.
Well, I just want to affirm, you are that for other people.
Well, thank you.
You have been for me, but I see it throughout your ministry, not only here, but I've been fortunate to know your family and to know more of your ministry, especially because of Florida Conference. And, and God forbid that I know you lead a lot of the clergy groups that happen in our conference, but that you ask the question about whether or not you've had impact. But I want to affirm that you do that for others, and I'm grateful to know that others do that for you.
Yeah, well, you guys have been that for me.
Well, I hope so.
I mean, really grateful for that. Yeah. So, we're running. We always run
out of time. I know.
But
we can just turn the camera off and just sit here and talk.
I know. This is the best story, I think, in the whole first section. So he tells this incredible story about how his father had become an Episcopalian, and then an Episcopal priest after having grown up as a Baptist. And Bishop Curry's mother was dating his father when she invited him to go to church with her in Chicago. They were among the very few black worshipers in the pews in those days. And when it came time for communion, the priest welcomed them all to share in one chalice, but he was incredibly skeptical. Jim Crow was still alive and well in the 1940s, and Curry's father held back even as his mother went forward. One person after another drank of the cup, including his mother. When his father told the story, he would always say, "Any church in which blacks and whites drink out of the same cup knows something about the gospel that I want to be a part of." Wow, that is love in action. That story was so powerful for me. I want to give each of you a chance to comment on it too.
Well, before we came in, I was commenting that, because I'm a church dork, I watched Bishop Curry's installation as the presiding bishop, and he tells this story in an even more powerful way, in my opinion, in his installation sermon. And so to think about his non-Episcopal father, and frankly, his non-Episcopal mother, I think he talks about it in the book. I've read a couple of things about him this week, so I may be pulling it. His mother was Quaker, which you might appreciate, but she had received a scholarship.
That's right. She went to an Episcopal school.
Because she went to an Episcopal school. And so you have like this non-Episcopal mother, this non-Episcopal father, who are both black, and this white Episcopal church who have this powerful experience, who then, fast forward, however many years later, whose son becomes the first African-American presiding bishop, again, it was just incredibly moving. And you could feel, just by watching it on YouTube, you can feel the power of that moment in his sermon in the National Cathedral. I mean, it's really powerful when he tells that story. And so again, I'm sitting on my couch crying while watching YouTube church services because, that's what normal people do.
I was equally moved. And it made me think about some lessons that I've been learning through the Black Lives Matter and the anti-racist movement that surrounds us. He talks about, this was in the 1940s. What I have become more aware of, that breaks my heart, but I need to be aware of, is not just what's still going on now, because that's real, but what was going on around me when I was growing up that I didn't react against. And you've heard me say this, and it's not until thinking about it even now that I ask it in a different question. But there were 2 Baptist churches in Rockville, Maryland. We were the church that accepted blacks. The other church is a Southern Baptist church that at that time did not. And I've said that, I bet, 1,000 times over the course of my life, but not thought about, so why the hell didn't somebody do something about it? Why did the community let that be? And I can't go back and undo that, but, and actually my parents have wrestled with some of the same things, and they've told me recently this story, which I had heard, but it was in the late 60s, early 70s, that neighbors were moving and they were selling their house, and the family that was buying it was a black family. And our neighbors we were really good friends with came over to ask my parents if they had any problem with that. And I mean, they were appalled at the time and were like, of course not. And now it bothers them that they would even consider that, to ask that, but I think it was really more about their sense of the community than anything particular about my parents. But it's like, why was that a question? And it's knowing that those things were going on around me, and I was just not aware of it. And I'm not trying to feel guilty about it, but to feel this awareness. And it pains me to think about, what kids even in the 80s or 90s, or the kids who are growing up now are experiencing that we're not aware of. And the movements are helping us to become more aware, but well, I've said enough.
No, I just think it's so powerful. And Deb, you're the one with the formal training, but the term that kept coming to my mind, Sharon, as you were sharing that, was survivor's guilt in a way. It just, again, a broad generalization, but thinking about, reflecting on why am I in a different place of privilege versus others? And again, I'm not trying to assign guilt to you, but just saying, like, why did I do something, or why am I in a different place than others? And again, I'm not trying to play armchair psychologist. I just am really struck by.
No, but I think what you're pointing out is those of us who have privilege.
Right.
There is a certain amount we feel. I'll speak for me. I feel a little guilt and a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and increasingly, like you say, the awareness that is brought to us through the various social movements. I just am increasingly, I'm amazed every day, as someone who feels pretty enlightened most days, how unenlightened I feel.
Well, I'm going to move back to just one. I think we only have time for one more. So he tells the story of Mary Magdalene, which I thought was interesting. We'll go back to our biblical roots. He said he's talking about Mary Magdalene going to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body after his death. She was simply doing the next right thing. She was carrying out the rituals of her faith. While she was doing that, she stumbled headlong into the miracle of the resurrection. And if she hadn't been going through the motions, as he put it, she would have missed the miracle. Because remember, this is about how we discover God. Sometimes I know that we are so discouraged and so tired that all we have is the ability to go through the motions. And Curry suggests that that is where we see the miracle. Any thoughts on that? About going through the motions and seeing the miracle?
Actually, what came to my mind, and I don't know that I would use the word miracle, but I would certainly use the term experience of God, is that there are times when I'm in worship, and now I'm speaking as a member of the congregation more than as clergy, but when I'm going through the motions, when I'm reciting the Lord's Prayer and singing the hymn and listening to the sermon, when something that is said in the sermon, something in a prayer, I sing a hymn that I've been singing for my whole life, and I'm overcome. And I try to make sure the tears don't fall, they're just there. And it's just that sense that in the process of, what I've done every week for so long, that there's something about that moment that I feel God's presence and God's word in some way, and it's
Yeah, which speaks to the beauty and the intentionality of liturgy. Is that it's so rote in some ways that it takes us out of ourselves so that we can just do it. I wonder sometimes about it's the cliche fake it till you make it, and sometimes both in my personal life but in my professional life, if I'm really honest, I've had to fake it till I make it. And usually it's because I'm so tired. Yeah. But I sometimes think that that's when God does God's best work, because I'm out of the way, because I'm so tired. Really, I can't argue, I can't fight, I can't be stubborn. And God says, well, if this is how we're going to have to play, then fine, this is how we'll do it. And like you say, Sharon, those are the moments where it's a hymn that I've sung literally probably 100 times. Or, the Lord's Prayer. I can't even imagine how many times I've said the Lord's Prayer. And all of a sudden, I'm caught with emotion. Or, whatever it is. And I think to myself, the human, I think probably the human part of me says, well, I'm just tired. But if I'm really honest and if I really reflect on it, I think it's God is able to let my guard down. I can be vulnerable, and I can really think through and reflect on those moments where my heart and my soul can be truly touched. In worship, it does happen in those moments.
I think I'm with you on that. I think it's when I'm most exhausted, but I'm still doing the next right thing.
Right.
And I felt a lot during the pandemic, is that there have been a lot of times of exhaustion, and I'm not alone. And we're not alone. Everyone has experienced that just simple exhaustion and irritability and frustration. But in the moments when I don't succumb to that, but still do that next right thing, whatever that is, which is to be kind to David, even if I'm really irritable, or if it's to make that phone call to somebody who's lost a loved one, even if I don't feel like it, and then be present in that moment, God shows up. And so I like that concept of the next right thing, just doing it, because I don't know if you remember these days. Did you ever hear God can't move a parked car? Did you ever hear that phrase?
No, but I like it.
Yeah, I think it's it's probably old, aphorism in some prayer circles. God can't move a parked car, but there's some truth to it. When we stay stuck and we're not even going through the motions, God, it's hard to meet God. Whereas if we do that next right thing, God can show up and we can meet God in another person or in a moment.
It reminds me of one of my favorite sayings I stumbled on a couple years ago that says, God can move a mountain, but don't be surprised when God hands you a shovel.
That's a good one.
I mean, and I think about that sometimes in my prayer life. It's like, well, be careful what you pray for because, yeah.
Well, I haven't heard fake it till you make it, but what I've heard are similar admonitions in terms of, so you don't feel hopeful, you act hopeful.
Right.
I mean, he talks about love is an action. You
Yeah.
don't feel loving, but you act loving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is in that process that I do think God transforms us as well as whatever's happening.
That's a really excellent point.
Yeah, I'm going to walk away remembering Mary Magdalene just did it. She just did it. And she
Yeah.
changed the world. So, in fact, we wouldn't have had the Gospels without her. So,
Absolutely.
just saying. Okay, so thank you for a really rich conversation. I'm really excited about the next weeks because I love the book
I was
already.
going to say, the book, I really have to commend it to people. Actually, I already commented to my parents that I hope that they would get it because it's just, I think he's just a powerful figure. I commented on my social media yesterday, a consequential
Yeah,
figure.
it's just wonderful. And I love the book, easy read.
Yeah,
but
yeah, but
some
challenging in all the right ways.
great one-liners.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next week we're going to be talking about chapters 3 and 4, which I'm really looking forward to. And I think
it's
that's
you.
Dawson's
I mean,
on.
I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I
he
was
has to
trying
do
to
the
think, I
work
was like-
because it's a lot of work to get this ready.
It
But
is.
anyway,
Yeah, chapters 3 and 4. Right, got
so
it.
I want to share
So
with
on top of
you
that.
as we complete this. I really want to share with you a blessing, and I think it came from Curry, but I can't remember because I wrote this a couple weeks ago. So whoever wrote it said, "Where selfishness excludes, love makes room and includes. Where selfishness puts down, love lifts up. Where selfishness hurts and harms, love helps and heals. Where selfishness enslaves, love sets free and liberates. The way of love will show us the right thing to do every single time." Good night. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.